It was the largest law enforcement operation in Canadian history. The truck convoy that started out of frustrations over vaccine mandates and lockdowns was broken up in a joint police effort as the protest entered its fourth week in Ottawa. The protesters vowed to hold the line, but after days of police pressure, nearly 200 arrests, tear gas, and pepper spray to clear the crowds, and bank accounts of key players frozen, organizer Tom Marazzo told the protesters to peacefully retreat. More than 2 weeks after the truckers arrived in Ottawa, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked the Emergency Act for the first time.
This is about keeping Canadians safe, protecting people's jobs, and restoring confidence in our institutions.
Beyond disrupting the quiet streets of Ottawa, the blockades expanded to border crossings, first in Coutts, Alberta, and notably in Windsor, Ontario, costing millions in trade. While the blockades have been cleared, protest organizers vow they are still fighting for their cause. In the aftermath of the Freedom Convoy, one thing is clear: Canadians are divided on many fronts. This week on Context, being peacekeepers in an era of division. Welcome to Context. I'm Maggie John. With key organizers of the convoy under arrest, spokesperson Tom Marazzo has been spared so far. He says his bank accounts have been frozen and credit cards canceled. In an emotional press conference on Saturday, Marazzo told protesters to peacefully withdraw from the streets of Ottawa, but vows the movement will regroup. Thanks for joining me today, Tom. Tom, you are one lucky man. Most, if not all, of your fellow organizers have been arrested. What do you see your role being now in this protest?
Just to regroup at this point, there are several truckers in the Ottawa area. They're on the outskirts of towns in different places. And I'm going out to meet with them this afternoon and to see really what they want to do. What's their next step? And we've said all along that this is not any one person. Like, you can't point to one leader of this movement. This is Canadians all over the country, and that's what we've seen in several cities across Canada, across the US, in Europe, Australia, New Zealand.
Okay, this protest was initially about vaccine mandates against truckers. There was a memorandum of understanding that asked for the government to be overthrown. Over the weeks, the messaging seems to change to an opposition against all COVID mandates. One of your last press conferences, Tom, listed 5 bullet points, essentially wanting to end all vaccine mandates. Do you think that will happen now?
I think that Canadians that have been watching this throughout are really going to be woken up to the fact that I think they don't like the idea that their financial assets can be frozen with no notification. So even the hardcore people that are pro mandates and everything like that, the one thing they're not going to like is the fact that without any due process, the government is able to actually go in and freeze all of your assets just for providing any sort of Facebook support, social media support, or even contributing a few dollars for something that they believe in and have a right to express. And then the other thing is, on the political side, like, we've never been about the politics. Like, we're not here for government change. Like, the convoy itself is one group of many groups that are here in Ottawa that at times sees the opportunity to benefit from the attention of the convoy. And so there are several different groups in the Ottawa area that, try to exploit an advantage for their particular cause. But never did this convoy ever, in any meeting I was ever in, talk about change of government or anything like that. It's not we're not interested in it. We know there are groups associated with this, but those groups were active in their cause months before the convoy was ever even an idea. So, like-minded groups came together to do this convoy, but the main mission of the Freedom Convoy 2022 has always been end the federal mandates.
And so let's focus in on those mandates. I guess that's where my question lands. Now that the protest has been dispersed, you've told people to go home peacefully. Where does this land when it comes to much of the mandates that this country is still under?
We are, like I did in the press conference the other day, we are exploring legal action against the government of Canada. That's one avenue that we have. But interviews like the one you and I are doing right now is another avenue that we have to put the pressure on some of the other political parties so that they can see what Canadians really are talking about. And then as it should be at the federal, provincial, or at the federal government level, the opposition party should be putting pressure on the actual formed government of Canada to represent what the people of Canada want, or at the very least, they should listen. And in this country, I haven't heard of one referendum on any issue related to COVID-19 in 2 years. Not one referendum has come out of any government level in this entire country. Nobody asked the voters to actually vote whether they wanted these things to be imposed on them.
Tom, I also want to give you the opportunity to address another concern that was there. There were accusations that there were Confederate flags, swastikas, and other offensive terms being used during the protest. How would you address those accusations?
So Chris Barber, one of the sort of founders of the truck convoy, had a Confederate flag, and we spoke about it, and he said, it's a part of the world's history. It's not a symbol of his core beliefs. It's just a and for all, to be honest, it's an American symbol of something. It's not a Canadian symbol of anything. But in terms of the Nazi flags, I never saw any. I can't even comprehend that whole line of thinking, to be perfectly honest. I never saw one. There's never anything in this movement that had anything to do with Nazis or neo-Nazis or anything like that. But we can't all be painted with the same brush because maybe one individual brought that kind of symbolism to this protest. But it had nothing to do with what our cause was. The people I'm with are extremely faithful, religious people that denounce that kind of behavior and always would, and wanted nothing to do with it.
Thanks so much for your time today, Tom. I just want to speak as a Black woman just on your comment about the Confederate flag. There are some deep roots when it comes to the Confederate flag, and it hurts me to hear the lack of understanding of how it could be offensive to someone like me. So I would just challenge and hope that you and your team would do a little bit more research on how it could offend Black people in our country. Even though it doesn't have its roots in Canada, it's still quite offensive part of North American history. But I just wanted to make sure that you personally heard that with me.
And I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. But what we can't do, from just my own point of view, is we can't get rid of history. We have to learn from it. We have to be able to talk about it, and we can't be censored when things are offensive, because there are a lot of things about that are offensive. There are many offensive things throughout history, but we have to not hide from them. We have to confront them. And maybe this is a platform to do that at another time, obviously, but we have to confront our past. We'll never learn if we don't.
We do. We just don't have to wave it in front of other people if it's going to offend our brother or sister. Thanks so much for your time today, Tom.
Thank you.
You can go to our YouTube channel for an extended interview with Tom Marazzo, where he shares a message for Ottawa citizens and counter-protesters. Counter-protests have sprung up across the country to voice their opposition to the trucker convoy, including one this past weekend in Toronto. Dr. Philip Berger has been part of these protests, and he joins me now. Thanks for joining me today, Dr. Berger. Tell me why you felt so strongly about being part of these counter-protests.
Well, since the beginning, those who have led the convoy have heaped scorn and vitriol against frontline healthcare workers, many of whom I know, threatened them and blitzed them with racist and misogynist social media attacks. We found it grotesque that they target the very health professionals who care for them and rescue them from a COVID death. Further than that, there was a week or so ago, one of the leaders of the convoy, I saw him in the media, threatened to come to Toronto because Toronto needed some, quote, entertainment, and they were coming to deliver it. Our hospital, the hospital I work at and throughout the Toronto area, were told not to wear uniforms that would identify us. And we felt very strongly that we will not be intimidated and we will not sneak into our clinics and hospitals to do our work. That's why we came out initially 2 weeks ago with a healthcare worker-led protest.
Dr. Berger, does the trucker convoy have a point, though? Have the vaccine mandates gone too far? Have the lockdowns maybe gone too far? Have we lost a sense of freedom as Canadians over the past few years?
Well, look, I have to tell you, healthcare workers, as much as anybody, know how horrendous the last 2 years have been. We share the sickness, death, and loneliness brought on by COVID. We too are sick and tired of the ambiguity, despair, and economic hardship. But none of that justifies or means that we or any Canadian should have had to put up with the chaos of the past 3 weeks. I know many of these public health leaders. They're experts, they're professional, they're responsible. They don't want to make people's lives miserable. They have instituted measures like lockdowns and vaccine passports and requirements on airplanes, etc., in order to protect the public. I don't view them as a loss of freedom. I view them as a matter of self-defense from COVID.
What message do you want to send to the people in the trucker convoy?
I would say that I share with them the exasperation and agony of the last 2 years. We have a new grandson. We're afraid to go over and see him. I've missed my friends and family, as do all the people I know. We have that in common. I think it's perfectly fine to demonstrate and protest and exclaim opinions, but to have it infiltrated by people who are outright racists, people who wear the fly Nazi flags, saying Christian prayers when someone with a racist beside you, I mean, it's fantastic to consider. What I see here in Ottawa are people who are really betraying the values of caring for each other in Canada, of watching out for our neighbor, of fairness. I didn't see any of that. Now, were there good people in there? I suppose there are some decent people who are just seriously misguided. I do have to say also that I was horrified, as many people were, that some of these occupiers and convoy commanders hid behind their children, who they took with them, exposing them to diesel fumes, excruciating loud noises, profanity on the streets and on their signs. They were unashamed to use children to shield themselves from arrest for their lawlessness. Heroes protect their children. Cowards hide behind them. This was a convoy of cowards.
We have 1 minute left, Dr. Berger. With the sheer size of the protests across the country against mandates compared to the size of the counter-protests, some might think that more Canadians are in favor of the truckers than against. What are your thoughts on that?
All polls indicate the opposite, number one. Secondly, our protest, where we had nearly 1,000 healthcare worker-led people show up, was organized on 36 hours notice. We don't have any money coming from extremely right-wing funding sources in the United States. We're all working. We can't take time off like some of the leaders have from their work to engage in social media communications. It just shows their obsession and fanaticism that they would stop their lives, leave their children, those they did not take with them to the protest, and dedicate themselves fully to this. This is a completely misguided view of freedoms. It had nothing to do with freedoms. It had to do with protecting the rest of us who have done the hard work of being vaccinated, wearing masks, and keeping their social distance. That's responsible citizenship.
Dr. Philip Berger, thank you for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Still ahead, what does the Q panel think of the trucker convoy, this era of division, and their thoughts on how the church moves forward? Politics, race, the economy, COVID, and even faith. The division on many topics has never seemed as heated as they are today. How do we bridge opposing viewpoints and usher in unity after what many feel has been an exhausting 2 years? Chris Walker is pastor of Meadowbrook Church and author at Third Way Christians, and he's here to guide us on how to tackle difficult conversations. Chris, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So how are you seeing division at play within society and the communities that you serve?
Well, I think COVID has not created the problem of division, obviously, but it certainly has given us a lot more things to divide over. And so within my church community, within the town in which I live, that's certainly perhaps the most pressing thing that people are arguing about, whether it's masks or vaccines or the recent Freedom Convoy here in Canada. There are just lots of things that people are finding themselves on opposite sides of the fence on.
Well, you alluded to it. One of the biggest stories that has been going on has been the Freedom Convoy, with so many strong opinions on either side. How do Christians navigate how to speak into this issue?
Messily, probably would be the first thought. And that's actually okay. And that's something I always encourage at my church, is that we're not going to avoid the conversation. It might get messy, and that's all right, because life is messy. And so we shouldn't avoid it just because it can get tense, or we can find ourselves disagreeing with other believers. But we are always seeking truth, obviously, as Christ followers, but we are also seeking to love one another well. And so however we are pursuing truth, however we are wrestling through these tough issues, we can't do it in ways that are separated from love. And so it is possible to disagree passionately about things, but still treat people on the other side with dignity and with respect, and respect their position, even if we don't agree with it. And so we want to try and make room for that we are going to disagree sometimes. It's inevitable anytime people get together, but we want to be able to do it in the way of love. And we want to be doing it in a way that is in the way of peace as well, so that we're not dividing in a irreversible way over it, but we are finding the ways that we can remain in community even in disagreement.
Yeah. Never have we seen so much division in the church since the pandemic, as you alluded to. Have we always been so divided?
Yes, for sure. From the very beginning of the church, if you start to read the book of Acts, right away there are disagreements about how to distribute food to the poor. There's arguments over theology. And I'm actually really encouraged by the fact that much of the New Testament is the apostles trying to teach Christians how to get along with each other and how to navigate these things. So there have always been things that we have fought over. I'm an Anabaptist myself. If you are an Anabaptist or a Protestant, whatever denomination you are in right now, started as a split somewhere. There was a group that decided they needed to break away and start a new thing. And so this has constantly been something that's been there since the very beginning of the church. We're seeing it perhaps heightened in our times right now because emotions are high and we're all exhausted and we're carrying a lot. But this has always been part of what has gone on in the church. And I actually find that really encouraging, that previous generations have found ways to navigate these things. We will find these ways as well. And again, it might be messy, but as we continue to honor one another, love one another, seek the Lord, we'll figure it out. The church always has.
The unfortunate thing, or fortunate thing, is the apostles didn't have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of the social media that we have today. How much has social media played a role in the division that we're seeing in the church?
Well, I think one of the things we've talked about at our church is the fact that, 25 years ago, you might have disagreed with someone in your church, but you weren't exposed to every thought they were thinking all day long, that they felt the need to tweet about or share online. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge that piece of it, is that we're just not used to this much stimulation, especially in the area of disagreement. We're not well handled for it. We might not, I think, psychologically be meant to carry the weight of all the disagreement we can see with every friend we have on social media. So we need to make sure we're having some healthy boundaries in there, and making sure that, social media is a wonderful tool, but that it's not dominating our lives. We're not giving more time to it than we should. If there are voices that are bringing us into a place of extreme anger or a lack of peace, then maybe that's a voice we need to back away from, and making sure that we just have healthy boundaries around all this stuff, because social media can be a wonderful blessing. As we are seeing, it also can be something that contributes incredibly to the division. And so we want to make sure we're finding a healthy place with that.
All right, Chris Walker, pastor of Meadowbrook Church, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Division, dissension, name-calling, and that's not limited to what we have been seeing in the streets over the past few weeks. Who are we kidding? Even the past few years, not to mention the division we're hearing and seeing from Christians when it comes to a wide array of issues, from politics, race, COVID, and the list goes on. Well, the Q is here to discuss. Let's jump right in, guys. Julia, Calvin, and Colin are here joining me. Okay, the trucker convoy. I think most of us are in favor of freedom of protest, freedom of speech. It is a right we have as a democratic country, as Canadians. Was this issue of division over vaccine mandates handled well by all sides, the government, the truckers, the counter-protests? Julia, let's start with you because you're in Ottawa.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a very, very complicated issue. Has it been handled well? You know, my feelings about the convoy generally have been very, very complicated because I think it's been a complicated mix of things. I think most people who were filling our downtown streets or who blocked border crossings were well-meaning Canadians who were frustrated and fed up. They've suffered economically and socially as a result of mandates and restrictions. They've felt othered and excluded and marginalized and called un-Canadian, and I think that caused some deep hurt. So I think most probably wanted to just come together and push back against some of that, but at the same time, you know, organizers and leaders were quite publicly calling for the government to essentially be overthrown if they didn't get what they wanted. And they were misleading, whether willfully or not, this group of frustrated Canadians about what the rights to protest peacefully, among all kinds of other things, actually mean. You know, as you said, we have a right to protest peacefully, and that is an important right. It is a social good, but there are limits to it. And I think a lot of what we saw went beyond those limits here in Ottawa. Speaking as an Ottawa resident, you asked about our politicians. I think it's been really disheartening to see kind of a lot of mudslinging back and forth.
Yep.
And, you know, we have each side accusing the other of dividing, while at the same time playing very readily into those divisions. And it's just so discouraging because what we want to see from our leaders in a time of crisis is kind of an unwavering commitment to find common ground and find a way forward. So there's just been a lot about this that has been upsetting and difficult and, as I said, very complicated.
Yeah, it has been very complicated. I just want to clarify, in our conversation with Tom, he made it clear that the talk of overthrowing a government was not the core belief of the main group, and was kind of brought in by other fringe groups. So I just want to make that clear, but that was something that was discussed early on in the convoy with the Memorandum of Understanding. Colin, I want to go to the next question, but I want to hear your thoughts really, really quickly on what you think about the convoy and how things were handled.
Yeah, I agree that particularly the response of many of our politicians was disappointing and frustrating. To watch the leader of the opposition try to overtly hang this on the Prime Minister's neck, to watch the Prime Minister sort of again overtly in the media alienate people who had serious concerns that they wanted to voice. That was frustrating. It was frustrating all around. The politicking around this didn't really, it wasn't illustrative of really good leadership by and large. So that was very frustrating. And then another thing that was sort of, I think, broadly worrying to me was to see so many Canadians being so mistrustful of basic media coverage of the event. That was very worrying and frustrating to me to watch. Journalists who were trying to do their job, who were trying to represent what's actually going on. I tried to watch as much across the spectrum of the media as I could, and I think generally doing the best job they could, but being broadly mistrusted by Canadians. And an ill-informed public is not going to be able to manage to engage serious issues well. So that's something I'm still fairly anxious about that happened.
Yeah. Our time is just ticking away. Calvin, I want to get to you. Politics and the pews. How do we as Christians separate the two? Should we separate the two? It feels like politics have just infused the church and culture and how we see the world. Thoughts on that, Calvin?
One piece of great advice that was given to me was that as a Christian, you can have a position. It doesn't make it the Christian position. And I think in a day with social media and everybody has a pulpit, everybody has a platform, and everybody wants to be a prophet, we're living in a day where there are more polemics, like people who have very strong opinions and very convincing arguments, and we all live in echo chambers. And so by nature of the permission that we have to share our thoughts without being checked, you have a lot of people saying a lot of things, and it has to be what God wants because I'm a believer and this is what I want. And I think that's been enmeshed in everything that we're seeing, especially as faith groups kind of and are divided and are taking sides, and we're seeing it all. And I just think that it's okay to have an opinion, but it doesn't mean that it is the gospel for us or for the time that we're in or for our nation. I think it's very important that we're much more careful using scripture and our personal feelings in these times.
Yeah. Okay, we have 30 seconds. Calvin, I'm going to give you this challenge. So then how do we as Christians, how do we lend our voice to a cause without it being divisive?
That is the great question.
Right?
More conversations, less pontifications, more conversations, in my personal opinion.
Yeah.
I pontificate.
Julia, Calvin, and Colin, thank you so much for your time today. I love it when you guys weigh in on these issues. We need to hear them more. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
These past couple of years have shown us a different side of society, frankly, a different side of the church. A place that's supposed to be void of political influence has been soiled by rivalry and dissension, causing rifts in churches and in homes. We saw it in the New Testament. In fact, division is not new to the church. This is what Paul the Apostle said in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. I appeal to you, dear brothers and sisters, by the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ, to live in harmony with each other. Let there be no divisions in the church. Rather, be of one mind, united in thought and purpose. And then let's leave the last word to Jesus, who said in the book of John, chapter 13, verse 34, love each other just as I have loved you. You should love each other. Your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples. Thank you for watching. Let us know what you think of today's topic. Join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. For all of us here, I'm Maggie John. See you next time.
Thank you for your ongoing support of Crossroads, a supporter-funded nonprofit organization and member of the Canadian Centre for Christian Charities. Thanks to faithful people like you, we are able to continue producing context. You can write to Crossroads, P.O. Box 5100, Burlington, Ontario, L7R 4M2, or visit crossroads.ca to learn more about our programs.
Context Beyond the Headlines invites you to an exciting new season. This year, we're expanding our reach with a brand new podcast that will explore the interaction between faith, justice, culture, ethics, and society. As we move forward with this brand new season and the launch of this brand new podcast, would you consider partnering with Context financially? It is because of the generosity of viewers like you that we're able to continue to tell the stories that matter.